All right. My name is Chris Douglas, and I am an engagement manager at Worldwide Technology. And today I'm talking about the rise and the use of location-based technology since the pandemic, and really, what this means for companies of all sizes. Um, some of the key verticals where we're seeing a lot of adoption, and more importantly, kind of like how we get started, some of the friction points, pitfalls, etc., and considerations for implementations for location-based technology. So, a little background on me. I joined Worldwide Technology in 2018 after running a tech startup for a few years. Startup life taught me a lot about implementing small iterative solutions so that you can use these to prove out larger initiatives. Ultimately, the concept of saving money and time up front, quickly abandon things that don't work, and embrace the things that do. And before that, I had an agency career that was really at the crossroads of digital and experiential. I this really helped me understand like a lot of the challenges around creating opportunities to build more digital context around customers in the physical space. And really, kind of the key takeaway here is that using this combined experience helped me really be successful in implementing some of these kind of data-driven solutions for customers that include components of location services. So. Next slide. All right, so who is Worldwide Technology? Well, we got our start about 30 years ago with infrastructure modernization and have really grown to add a number of professional services to help provide end-to-end solutions. We have deep experience in both the infrastructure and operations side, and along with customer-facing strategy, data and applications, which really gives us kind of a unique vantage point. And the group that I'm a part of is this digital group, which really the core, I'd say the concept of action is really core to our DNA. We really focus on speed to market. So finding early successes, getting measurable solutions in place as quick as possible. And across these focus areas is where we're really able to key in on specific markets such as QSR, grocery, hospitality, healthcare, and even some banking. And this really kind of helps tee up what I'm about to talk about today in regards to the impact of utilizing location-based technology across these industries and others, and kind of what we're hearing from customers and other businesses in the industry, and some examples of implementations, our processes, and just some of the trends we're seeing in location technology across these industries, and how companies are, kind of accelerating the process of making this part of their, marketing stack and digital transformation initiatives. So, while the pandemic is kind of forcing many businesses to spin up online channels to augment their acquisition opportunities to make up for the in-store experience that isn't driving many customers, restaurants, a lot of retail, healthcare, these guys are kind of light years away from replacing the in-store experience with the online one. So while it's helping augment those channels, the real focus that we're seeing is that some of the really smart businesses are investing in building out that infrastructure to be more pandemic proof in store, especially in service-focused industries, like restaurants, grocery, retail, and healthcare. Location tech is a part of this, and these companies, that are finding early successes are the companies whose executives are already thinking like tech companies. Better yet, maybe even like a SaaS company. We're seeing a lot of interest in utilizing location data for changing the customer experience, changing the operational experience, And, this was a hot topic last year, I'd say, all the way back to even Q1 with a number of our customers and potential customers. We had a lot of discussions with retailers, healthcare providers that were interested in indoor wayfinding, or just looking at how they could better utilize their Wi-Fi or Bluetooth beacon data. But quite frankly, what happened was shoring up their infrastructure was really the first step that they had to take to kind of fully revamp their experiences. And we were seeing that this was like another year or so out. Well, now here we are, almost a year into the pandemic. We're underway with a number of these engagements, or moving discussions along with others. We're going into POC processes with a number of these. And in quite a few, we're just in, full on implementation mode. So the pandemic, obviously has accelerated the timeline of implementation for this type of technology, amassing data on the customer experience side in relation to location technology. And it's really impressive that some of these businesses were able to move as fast. So, but interestingly, with the digital not being a core part of some of these businesses, transformation can come slow. It's at the pace of updating infrastructure and, migrating systems and layering both operational and customer experience changes over time. And frankly, a lot of times it comes with multi-year budgets. This is an actual quote I've heard before, because the core of a lot of these businesses is not in digital. There's a lot of legacy systems at play. And so oftentimes you really have to balance, what is the cost of putting this type of technology, in play, getting this data in the stack. Oftentimes we're looking at how we can incrementally, move the ball down the field for some of these companies. So, it may start with kind of wrapping and extracting data to get them to some level of a 2020 experience, while we incrementally help customers plan for infrastructure updates over time. So to make the most of really what we have available, we have to think in a very data-first perspective, meaning, what is the most relevant data that can be acted on first, and what's it going to cost us to act upon it? And then ultimately, what is the return, on that cost going to be? When we think about location technology, it really is a broad spectrum. But with the pandemic, everyone is looking for ways to kind of squeeze more data out of their in-house Wi-Fi access points, maybe upgrade their beacon technology or capture some of the metadata from these technologies that they can push to a BI tool, or even send further down the marketing stack. But as easy as that sounds, many companies aren't quite sure what to do with that data, even though they're asking for it. A lot of times this is because there's a split in demand. Maybe it's an IT-led engagement, but marketing is the group that's asking for it. So, we're fortunate. We have some customers who really got a jump on this early and had pilots in place with a handful of location services, indoor wayfinding technology, even data-driven signage, inventory, supply chain focused upgrades. That has really allowed them to fare well going into the pandemic, and more easily accelerate a broader rollout of these services. And these pilots last year all proved, quite honestly, as amazing case studies for us in, what's possible, where to even pivot, how to get up and running, how to implement and scale now during the pandemic, where, timelines are honestly a lot shorter. So, if a customer is interested in something, we have to act very quickly, and figure out how to iterate often so that we can get to a scalable solution as soon as possible. Because, with shopping channels kind of constricting, it's easy to hit a bottleneck, and we want to avoid those as much as possible. Which kind of leads to my next point. How do you implement in a pandemic when cash and resources are tight, channels are constrained? Every few months, the rules change on how you're supposed to interface with customers, or maybe like, you just even be open. The government has mandated, depending on where you are, a number of regulations that even keeps the in-store experience at a minimum, or occupancy. And at the same time, customer expectations are increasing very quickly. And with every demand, there's potential for another new bottleneck or friction point when you're adding new technology. And ultimately, you're also generating more and more data that has to be sorted and mapped in order to be acted upon. So thinking about like these challenges, I kind of like to put in context, what happens for like a small business who doesn't have some of these things to worry about versus a large business, how these things really stack up. So when you look at kind of implementing a change in customer experience, let's use curbside in this example. For a small business, it's actually much easier to implement, especially if you have one, maybe two locations. You don't have much for technical infrastructure. There's already a lot of analog and manual processes in place. Back in March, when all of this kicked off, there was a number of us from our team that actually helped a lot of small businesses that we frequented in our community put some of these processes in place. And this was a great kind of learning approach for us, while some of our larger customers, worldwide, were simply just trying to see what was going to happen next as the pandemic took off. So this kind of allowed us to kind of proof out some ideas and then ultimately apply them to some of our larger customers later on. Shopify, for example, there's so many great tools for businesses out there that are easy to implement. Shopify, they were early to the game. Their revenue, I think I read, nearly doubled last quarter because they were so quick to add features to their online store functionality that just made it easier for a lot of small businesses to adapt. But our customers, and I think many of the people that are tuned in here yesterday and today, this is a little more difficult because we're talking about scenarios where companies may have 4,000 restaurants around the country, right? Maybe they have drive-through and they need to speed up the drive-through lanes and orders because that channel is what has constricted, that's the one they have operational. Or a number of other complexities. Are you using a native delivery or third party? Each has their own upside, downside to them. Do you have an existing takeout infrastructure in place? Now that you've spun up online orders, how are you migrating your phone orders, and your online orders to some sort of automated system? And one of the biggest things I think we've seen with some of our customers is just consistency and location. We have a number of customers who may have freestanding, restaurants for some part of their, franchise population, but then maybe the rest, the broad majority, are in strip malls. So you think about like just the traffic flow patterns, parking lots, and how those experiences are different, operationally and for the customer. And then you start getting into the technology. What is the point of sale system? Is it modern? Is it modular? Is there a kitchen display system integrated with an online ordering system, or is that completely separate? And then, what are they doing? What do their digital channels look like? Is there a mobile app? And if so, is it a custom app or is it a white label app? What's usage like? How can we affect it? Can we grow it? If we're tapping into an existing mobile initiative, those are a number of considerations that we have to think about. And then ultimately, just moving into the pandemic, one of the big questions we had to ask ourselves and a lot of our customers is like, okay, so what are the measurement systems that you have in place right now, right? Is there referenceable data that we can benchmark against moving forward from last year prior to all this? And then finally, the biggest question at the end of the day is, what is the cost for implementing a new solution? Who's going to pay for it? With a lot of these models, is it going to be a franchisee, or is it corporate, or are they splitting the cost? There's just a lot of considerations that really kind of, once you start scaling, they take our challenges that we talked about a little bit ago, and it starts to become a compounding effect if we aren't careful. And so our approach is generally to start small. It's to go back to that scenario that I talked about before with the small business, and think about, okay, how can we incrementally implement changes with the mindset of a small business. Look at what is the highest impact, least disruptive, that we can learn from, iterate upon, and move forward. So we tested a number of opportunities with retailers and restaurants to revamp curbside ordering processes, understand where the friction points might be. Again, referencing all of those considerations that I mentioned previously, both operational, customer experience, and technology-wise. And so we started with analog components like signage and maybe instructing people to use their hazards to identify themselves when they pulled up to the store. We started measuring that type of engagement to understand what is the volume. Are there parking constraints? You've got different types of locations. And before we could actually graduate to like a more automated solution. And there's other factors outside of the customer experience as well, like the operational side. Can they even, as these channels increase, is there opportunities, these new channels increase, are there opportunities to modify things in the kitchen, right? Where there's solutions there that need to be updated to accommodate the influx of orders from these new channels. So it's not just a customer experience play. Looking at some of the retail work we did, line queuing was a big one that almost everybody had to deal with because of occupancy mandates. And, with one particular retailer, we started out very analog. We were manually counting people as they were coming in. We then started sending like the cash register feed to a dashboard counter that would then let the clerk know that they could let in more people. Eventually kind of iterating upon that to include geofencing. So we get into a more automated approach. Then, adding wait times and things like that to the app, to the web, SMS integration, eventually graduating to almost a fully automated system. So again, the concept of kind of starting small, making iterative changes, to really account for the customer and the operational experience along the way. So when we look at like what's happening now in the industry as a result of the pandemic, where are things going, especially with like location-based technology. When we look at restaurants, right now, obviously curbside delivery and drive-through are really kind of the winning channels. While a large portion of consumers are, anxiously awaiting the return to dining in, it's a channel that's just not producing as much revenue as it used to be. So, when we look at the experience pre-COVID to where things are going today, what we're seeing is, modifications to curbside, drive-through, maybe where a customer ID is actually being captured upon a geofence. Triggering a notification to the restaurant that then displays, the appropriate, customer information, so that the food can be, obviously carried out to the customer. We're also seeing kind of a similar trend in drive-through. So the ability to kind of pre-alert the restaurant that the customer has entered, the location area. Maybe this is either through a geofence, or even computer vision. And what we're doing with that is basically being able to determine, is this a prior customer? What does their typical order consist of? That way we can kind of send that data back to the restaurant to better prepare the prep staff. And then even looking at opportunities to affect delivery. really understanding how we can optimize routes and slot deliveries more effectively, using geofence technology, obviously understanding where a driver is at any given time, what meals are prepped to go next, and then even like sorting obviously the orders within the line queue. And I think some of the things that we're starting to look at now as restaurants are opening back up, is inside the store, where location services can really be used to augment the in-store experience. You think about what COVID's done to just bring the concept of cleanliness to the forefront. So remember all those pagers that would light up when your order was ready. Well, we're looking at how can location tech be used to actually just replace those pagers, right? Lower touch, more contactless type experiences in store, because the cleanliness standards have gone off the charts. Even thinking about how we can better account for occupancy and traffic patterns in the store, like where are people sitting, which seats fill the fastest, when do we know when to block off this table and move to this table, so that we can create a cleaning rotation, a better cleaning rotation in the restaurants. So a number of things to think about how location tech is being applied to the in-store restaurant experience. I think one of the things that was really interesting is that retail, grocery specifically, was almost kind of the least affected to some degree from a revenue perspective, right? It's the one industry where revenue was probably up for most retailers, even at its peak over 50% of the time. And because of occupancy per square foot mandates, we've worked with a number of retailers, as I mentioned, to implement line queuing and other occupancy kind of tracking measures with COVID, based on a combination of geofences, analyzing traffic patterns to better understand, how to merchandise in store, because people are just shopping differently now. So that's kind of changed the game in in-store planning, how to route customers to preserve social distancing measures. We've also done quite a bit of work around zoning in store, so using location technology to create actual like hot zones in the store around particular sections. These could be, some of the fresh food counters, for example, maybe a meat counter to trigger notifications to a shopper, who maybe hasn't purchased fresh meat in the past few trips, things like that. But bringing that tech to a very small kind of zone in the store and multiple zones to understand traffic patterns in stores and how some of these areas can be merchandised differently. And then even just helping create efficiencies around the pickup of purchases. So some of the things we're doing with like in-store wayfinding is around like utilizing kind of detailed planograms and inventory information to help customers kind of get the items quicker, powering the in-store search to where you come into a store, maybe you're using your grocery apps shopping list, and you're able to, the shopping list is able to resort based on your proximity to an item and what's next on your list. If it knows that you're at one end of the store, then it sorts the list completely opposite. So, that's where obviously a lot of the inventory technology, location technology kind of comes into play. And really, some of the other things we're looking at, again, and like the restaurant with the contactless world, Amazon Go, I think we all know they were the first ones to kind of spin up the contactless store. How right they were to do that so early on, and that adoption of that technology and that mindset, that just concept is shifting itself to mainstream grocery. And so, we're looking at powering scan and go solutions where we're using location technology to understand not just where somebody is in store, but at the end of their experience as they go to leave, and we're checking against where they were in store versus what's in their basket, so we can see, hey, is there something in this basket that is out of place, right? That came from somewhere in the store that's not on their receipt. So thinking about how using location technology to even help like with loss prevention in the store and that shopping experience. And really, healthcare is kind of the next kind of vertical industry that we're spending a lot of time in and working on solutions for. This is an industry that's really kind of taken a big hit, if you will. Some healthcare systems are really having a tough time right now. Elective procedures are down considerably, and these are the highest margin procedures, which means, revenue is down. And a lot of times with healthcare, you're also talking about large institutions, generally even multiple locations. Wayfinding is becoming more and more of a necessity, especially in hospitals where patients may be visiting multiple doctors per day. We work a lot with St. Jude Children's Hospital, and that is very much the case there. So, wayfinding is becoming increasingly important to make sure that patients are getting to appointments on time when they have multiple appointments in a day. When you think about some of the cancer research facilities, like St. Jude, understanding capacity and concentrations of patients and employees to help aid with isolating the high-risk patients, but also to aid in contact tracing if something were to happen. And then even kind of taking it a step further, again, going kind of back to that restaurant experience, helping with device tracking, again, with cleanliness. Think about it in the hospital. It's even more and more important with these institutions. One example that we're experimenting with is even like tracking down wheelchairs so that staff can make sure that they have been cleaned, and that they're in a cycle of cleaning. So just kind of want to quickly run through our approach. Obviously I've talked a little bit about how it's, an iterative process, starting small. We generally start with obviously data gathering. What are all the deltas that we need to consider? Are there analytics outputs that we can tap into? We work with a number of partners that are, obviously presenting here today, Radar, Amplitude, Segment, a number of analysis platforms that we, work with some of our customers to help just understand what some of that data is and even inform new ways of instrumentation so we can get to data that we're looking for, getting deeper into the experience audit and understanding what those friction points are and opportunities with the current digital experience. What I like to call the counter test. So defining the problem from both sides. It's not just a business problem. It's not just a customer problem. We've got to look at it from both sides in great detail so that we are careful not to introduce any new bottlenecks operationally. And then really digging into kind of the behavioral targets. Who are we trying to affect? Is it one cohort of users? Is it all customers? The technical component, as I've kind of talked about, I think significantly in this presentation, is what is going on behind the scenes. What are we going to have to integrate with? Is there new tech that needs to be adopted? Are we adapting old technology? And then kind of getting into the implementation plan itself. How do we put this in market where we can take it back out if need be? What if it's not working? We don't want to be completely disruptive to the customer and the business. And everything has to have a testing methodology to it. Like, what are the data points that we're going to measure, and what are we going to, at the beginning of this project, we're going to hold ourselves up to at the, first iteration, second iteration, and so forth. And only then are we really ready to prototype. And then, run through this all over again. It's an iterative process. We have to understand the scalability factors. So, I thought with baseball season winding down, I thought this quote was maybe appropriate for the wrap up. You got to have a long-term plan. It's now or never. So, jumping back into the kind of the pandemic mindset, right? We helped a lot of initially short-term band-aid strategies in the beginning. We learned a lot from small businesses. We know that like shoring up, infrastructure is a huge part of moving forward with this type of technology to beef up operations and customer experience. And many of our initiatives are really shifting to, I would say, long-term multi-year plans where infrastructure changes are being made to support more and more location-based technology solutions across a business. Not just one customer experience, but even operational, as I mentioned with the hospitals. Being able to track down devices, make sure they're clean. And it's funny because these initiatives were 2 to 3 years out last year before this pandemic. So when you think about that, that is a huge, huge operational and planning shift, especially when it comes to like budgeting. So, really, I guess what I want to leave with today is while the end of the pandemic is unknown, it's certainly forcing, in-store customer experience transformations at a very, very rapid pace. Thank you. I think we've got a few minutes for questions. So I will run through a few of these questions here. Retail I work is more like 2005 infrastructure. Great. So yeah, phone orders to online orders. Yeah, I think what we're seeing is in a lot of our work, they're coming in from both sides, and the key is being able to put those two things together in a system that is able to slot things accordingly for the kitchen. That's where there's a lot of, I would say, operational friction, is how to keep that going. Let's see, Al, you said, what do you say to QSRs, retailers who have implemented a good enough curbside solution, i.e. text the store after you arrive? I think, there's a lot of folks that are still kind of in that mode, right? They're using the good enough, and what is it going to take to push them kind of over the edge and expand on that to make it more automated? I think one is going to be, bandwidth. They're eventually going to hit operational restrictions, or maybe they're holding out for some of the, infrastructure updates. I think the next step for a lot of these folks is, again, just creating that next step iterative approach. Okay, maybe text messaging is working great for a couple of stores, but let's try a geofence solution, and then scale that out to another store. And then I think we're at time. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. And we have, I know we do have a booth. Worldwide has a booth. I think that is being staffed at around 2:45. So please come by for any questions there and find out more about Worldwide Technology. Thank you.